So for me, my personal issue with burnout is that it's an overextension of giving everything to everything else but myself. And then I have nothing left for myself. So for me, my personal issue with burnout is that it's an overextension of giving everything to everything else but myself. And then I have nothing left for myself.
At some point in your spiritual journey, there came a moment where you simply just had enough. You were simply tired of all the anxiety of wondering whether or not you were doing it right, whether or not you were praying right, or if you were using the right color candles, and the 3 a.m. prayers were leaving you feeling like a zombie the whole day. And you were probably wondering whether or not you are talking to the right ancestor on the right side of the right family. And you were just tired of chasing the deeper meanings of dreams, or which coincidences meant something and which ones were just life being random. And you come online and you're just bombarded by spiritual gurus who seem to have just appeared out of nowhere, saying all sorts of things that either sound downright stupid or leave you questioning everything that you thought you knew about spirituality. At some point, there came a moment where you just didn't want to deal with all of that anymore. Spirituality, or rather your pursuit of trying to understand African spirituality and to do the right thing, has probably sucked the life out of your soul, and you went through something that probably feels like a form of spiritual burnout. Some people reach this point sooner than others, but I believe that most of us, some more severe than others, have gone through some kind of being sick and tired. For a lot of people, this burnout is a result of having spent years and sometimes fortunes trying to resolve issues that they had been told were spiritual in nature. Yet they found themselves in an even deeper hole than the one they had started out with. As the pressures of life increase and the challenges that we have to carry become heavier, practicing spirituality begins to feel like a burden. At best, and at worst, it becomes the very source of the challenges that you face. I want to understand spiritual burnout, but not from an individual experience. I want to approach the topic from a broad perspective to try to find the root cause of not just why we experience spiritual burnout, but why is it that so many of us are going through it. And I also want to understand what a society governed by a healthy sense and practice of spirituality actually looks like historically, and how is it that we got to this point that we are in. For this conversation, I spoke to someone who has had a profound impact on my own journey, and someone that I consider a spiritual elder, and that is Gogo Thato Tshukudu. topic more broadly and to take into consideration the possible historical roots of how we got to this point and where we are so spiritually burnt out, and why is it that so many of us now really don't want anything to do with African spirituality? So to start off with, in your view, what kind of relationship did people have with spirituality back in the day?
So I actually think the question should be, how as spirit beings do we relate? How is our relationship with the human self? Because that's the thing that we actually need to relate to, because it's foreign, outside of ourselves. To be human means adult. We need to deal with the matrix, all of these other things. There are actual human aspects. My issues around how do we relate with the human aspect of ourselves, because we don't need to relate to the spirit aspect of ourselves. Therefore, we don't need to relate to spirituality. Because so rona rira dilo like upside down or inversely. You know, we deal with spirituality as if it's outside of ourselves. You know, as if it's something that needs to be attained for us to remember who we are. Mar ithoma ka rona. Wa bona. So never sa relate lo, never tshwantse ba relate le being human. Gore ka tseko ke tsogile ke le in a bad mood. Tshwantse ke dile le ntweo. Ka tseko ngwana gana tšhelete ya skaftini, and then how do I relate with that? Not with how I relate with spirituality. So I think the difference is that then they understood what we are calling spirituality is actually their essence of who they are, and what they really have to relate to, what they really have to build a relationship with is the human aspect of themselves.
In those days, who were the custodians of that kind of knowledge?
Everybody. Ngwana o monyenyane who's a baby, who's now just at the birth of transitioning into bophelo,
Life itself.
Kana ngwana ona who's 3 months old, 2 months old, a week old, or whatever, has just done has transitioned through the most important rite of passage that they could ever think of, from moving from spirit realm into the physical realm. Right?
That's a rite of passage in itself.
That's a whole rite of passage on itself. And then the final rite of passage is, how do we transition between the physical realm into the spiritual realm? So ngwana o leng leseya, a baby, teaches us so much just around, because ke custodian near the spiritual realm, because ke custodian near spirituality, because also from that realm that we want to connect into. And that child is not affected by our humanness. So there's things that we learn from a child as a spiritual custodian that is important when that child is born and birthed into this earth. Right? And then there are things that we learn from people who are going into adulthood, because that's also a transition. That's why I get it. And then there are times where then we move from young adulthood or teenagehood into adulthood, and so on and so forth. So I feel like right now, our spiritual custodians, into kingship, people who were our wisdom keepers. That's what we would say. That level of grandeur about how we see people who should be spiritual custodians. And if granted, the longer you go through certain rites of passages, the more experience you get around who you are as a spirit being. I get that's why then the elders would be seen then as the anchorers of the spiritual custodianship. So our reliance is then on the elders, because they've gone, especially those that have gone through all these rite of passages, because they've gone through death and rebirth, birth and death, and so on and so forth, many times over. We have wonderful words where we say this person is a library. The library has fallen, and so on and so forth. We say all these things, I get it, because they carry with them the wisdom of the spirit as it goes from the initial rite of passage between spirit into physical, and then the end of the rite of passage between physical and spiritual. So yes, our spiritual custodians then will be those that would preside over the council of elders. Go khorong or go khorong ya dingaka di sia se batho ba ne ba tshwara dikoma wa bona the wisdom keepers. But what about the artists? What if the sculptor in our village is a spiritual custodian? Wa bona? What about the little baby that teaches us patience, that teaches us that we need to connect to spirit? Sometimes maybe we're connected to these energies that we can't see because they're pure of spirit. They're so pure, they're not contaminated by worldliness. So why are they not our spiritual custodians? So I feel like there's an understanding, or there was an understanding for the spiritual custodians was everybody, and everybody had a role to play. But because of how we've moved over the years, over the generations, over the lineages, dingaka, our spiritual leaders, our wisdom keepers, and our elders it would be what we see as our spiritual custodians.
You mentioned craftsmen as also keepers of knowledge. How do you imagine different spiritual gifts were dealt with back then? Because now we only deem a calling to be a sangoma as a spiritual gift. Now, if people's related to spirituality back then less as something external to them and more something that they were expressions of gifts like craftsmanship, did they consider them as something that came from beyond them?
Definitely. And it's also beyond them, not externalized, Wawan?
Yes.
So not beyond them, like it's outside of me. Mara, what's the gift? These gifts. Like a spiritual gift, let me rather say.
Yes.
Like the gift of healing, the gift of seeing, and all of those
which
things.
is the thing that we think is the gift, Hanan. We only recognize
spiritual
it healing as a spiritual gift.
Mara, the drummer heals us through beating the drum in the rhythm that will activate that is within us that is hidden, or that is within us that needs to be healed. There's something about the vibrational frequencies, the rhythmic process that activates something within us. That's why music, we feel like there's music that heals us. So in a spiritual context, as the analogy, you've got the drummer. The drummer beats the drum. There's something about the sound of the drum, even the intonations of the drum, even the tonality of the drum, and then the rhythm of the drum, and even the drums themselves, because there's different types of drums and the tones in which the drums sing to us. I get it. in West Africa, they've got baby drums, they've got the father, the mother drum, they've got the grandparent drum, as an example. How did we get to things like saying a drum is a talking drum? How did we get to connect to Ingoma Lungundu, for example? That we akin it to the voice of God or the drum of thunder. That means there is something ethereally magical about beating the drum that does something.
And the person who made the drum, who was able to find that connection.
Leona. There's a marriage that happens. I can't beat the drum. I know a lot of drum healers. Because there's something within them that whatever they need to, whether it's their hands or sticks, something moves within you. Okay, sharp. Remember getting baleta murupa. They are drum healers. I get it. Then there are those who, because of whatever invoke inside of them, they feel the need to get up and move their feet. The dancers. And there's something so majestic about their movements that speaks to you and it heals you. The way they move so effortlessly says something to you. They're healing you through them channeling this connection that they have to move their bodies and dance. Wabon? And then there's something about the voice that also makes you feel some type of way, that heals you. Who's your favorite singer and why? Everybody will have different names to share. Because there's something that connects their spirit to the spirit of that person or pelang that moves them and heals them. The ones that are the artists that make things out of nothing or that make things that come to life. Whether it's a sculptor, a blacksmith, a painter, and whatever. What we see that they've put on a canvas, what we see that they've shape-shifted from a log of wood into this amazing, beautiful piece of art, whether kipatla or whatever, is something that they channeled and they made happen through what they channel. From a log, munna. A log mutu busy. Days, busy, chipping away at that wood until that wood is a face of a woman, until that wood is a snake, until that wood is a kipatla, until that wood is a musical instrument. They are all healers.
How did rites of passage affect spirituality? How did rites of passage affect people's sense of spirituality, or what was the function of rites of passage within spirituality?
And also it's almost like a sense of a journey of remembrance. So earlier on, the first birth rite of passage is birth, right? And that's why they ready ritual to make the transitioning from the spirit to the physical realm a bit more cushioning for that spirit, for that soul, for that baby. So ke nagana gore rite of passages is almost like re ya ko skolong re thoma ka grade R, and then ra passa and whatever. But as re gain knowledge, re gain knowledge, re gain the skills, and we also gain experience, right? Until such time we pass a matric, and then we choose to go to college, university, and so on and so forth. It's a similar concept in terms of rite of passage. Rite of passage is around how do we anchor as a community this person through their journey as a soul within this journey that they're living in this lifetime. That spirit ya gage e gole. So I think that rite of passages were very important in anchoring, number one, in terms of where we are.
The teenage hormones are raging.
Adolescent, thing is just acting out. And that example is around what are we doing as a community to anchor that person, so that also in the acting out, because the acting out is important, in the acting out, how do they remember themselves? So I think rite of passages for me was that in your soul evolving, because if you were to imagine your soul starts in a little bottle the size of a peanut butter bottle, but your soul keeps growing and growing. And then needs another container, or imagine a plant like in the Ndumba. It starts in a little pot plant, but the roots keep spreading out. So then you need to repot the plant into a bigger pot, and so on and so forth. So those bigger pots to accommodate your roots because you're growing is the rite of passage. But also it's around how do we then anchor you as a community through that process.
I think the plant growing is actually a very interesting analogy, in that it gives the sense that you've outgrown a certain aspect of life. You've outgrown it, and in going into a bigger pot, there is some kind of separation that needs to happen, or a breaking of the mold, as it were. In some instances, the plant has already broken the clay pot or whatever it was in. So there has to be an actual formal process of moving from one thing into another thing, and there being some kind of communal framework of adjusting to that new pot, instead of just you putting it in the new pot and then, and I'm imagining that infrastructure being some kind of, when you take a plant out of a small pot and you put it into a big pot, you need to put more soil into it, right? You need to put in more into it, so that otherwise it's not going to grow right in the new pot. It's going to fall, it's going to, so there has to be some way of helping to anchor it and help it adjust to now its new way of being, and how to expand properly, because it also puts parameters still, or you can't just now grow. You still, in a certain way, you're still not a plant that can be put in the ground and your roots can grow wherever they want to grow. They still, you're going into a bigger pot and a bigger pot until you go into the ground, where you are fully a person now who can expand and branch out into. I think that's a very interesting analogy. So now, in transitioning then from those times, we fast forward into how we then move from those villages and that setting, we're moving to urbanization. How do you think urbanization and the movement into urban areas affected our sense of spirituality?
We stay in the same pot that we were planted in. So then it stifles us. It doesn't allow movement for growth. The thing around the soil being, then you put more soil into it, and therefore it's anchoring is an analogy, a symbolism of community. Wabo? So repila in that little pot plant ele ya mathomo ele. Ke rona ba o ka mo pot planting eo. Ne? And then urbanization, then that comes with socio-economic issues, that come with systemic socialization, and all of those other things, is that then we end up staying in this little pot. Marahola. Roholela ko kae if ga gona anyone or reng gore a re ntshe nicely out of that little pot, a re tsentse into the next one. You know? And I also don't think it's outgrowing, it's growing out. Ne? It's like we're not outgrowing the small pot, we just then giving space to further grow into who we are. So I feel like urbanization then stifles our growth because of all those factors that the matrix. I get Mahotepo, woke people, this matrix that stifles us into forcing us not to fully explore or experience the coming of being that we should experience. So moving from Poto to getting into the ground where we can freely just express ourselves. So I feel like, and you see it even, it's not even symbolic anymore. I get, you see it even practically. Batho ba tseilwe ko magaeng a bona in these farms, stands, plots, and then through these acts that the apartheid or the colonial government put into place, we were forced to move out of these places. So all these forced removal places, they uprooted us. We're growing now. Barisa ko di Sophia town, barisa ko di townshiping. So when you had opportunity and ample space to fully realize who you are, because you had land, you had access. Now in a shack, go deep slowed, ne? And you have to share it with everybody else. That's the worst case scenario. Then Rona, middle class kids who had at least some sort of opportunity. We live in townhouses, we live in urban areas and whatever. But it's still like physically.
It's a constricted life. Physically
it's constrictive. So the spiritual representation of it is that we can't grow out of those little small pot plants. Or it makes it that much more difficult, or we have to adapt. Marona re godile re le ko magaeng re kgona go roam free re sa di khomo re ditsa kwa lesakeng re disa dilo dia kwa le dilo nwa metsi ko nokeng re boa wa bona ne re phela yalo. And so that's also then symbolically how it represents our spirituality or our connection to spirit, is that in urban spaces there is all of these strange restrictions or constrictions that we feel living in these urban spaces. So it's either we adapt or die, or we say, how do I move out of this so that I don't feel like I'm in that little small pot plant? Or that big pot plant, someone repotang into this big pot plant so that I can at least do roots so that they can breathe. So I think urbanization was deliberate in that physically it forced us from all those spaces that were rich in minerals, agriculturally fertile, the spaces in which we could do our rituals in peace, the spaces in which we could grow organic food, all of those places. It was deliberate to move us from that space in which we knew how to live and how to be. Waba? Physical. But spiritually, it was also the agenda.
Because it's literally a situation where you're taking a big plant in a big pot and you're shoving it into a smaller
Eh,
pot.
it-
And you have to cut its roots. You have to force it now into this smaller pot.
You're actually bringing up an interesting thing. It's actually it could actually somehow be regressive.
Wow.
Because you see, the analogy I made was we were still in the small pot plant, and then we don't have space. But actually, what you're bringing forth is that we could have grown where we needed like 3 pot plants larger than where we are now. But in actual fact, had we fitla go bar, hadn't a pot plant big enough to hold you.
We only have a 4-roomed house.
Omo 4-room house
And there's 10 of you.
and then le 15 ka mo the cousins tsa lona bo rakgolo ba lona and everything a re le khate bikinyana a re le khate claps ra khatiwa. So you're bringing forth another dimension to this, that actually the deliberation was around, you've grown too much, let's cut your wings so that you don't fly.
I had a conversation some time ago with my mother, and she was telling me about when they moved from the farms into a new township. They were the first residents of the township in which she grew up in, and I think she was right, around about 5 or 6 or something at the time. And I remember as she was describing what happened, in that, in the farms, you didn't have communities on farms.
Yeah.
You would have like a family here, or maybe 2 families.
Yes.
And then the next farm would have another family there, and then just like that. There weren't like a lot of people.
Yes.
You didn't have a whole township living on a farm.
Yeah.
It would be like a couple of families. So now all of them move into a township.
Yes.
Now there's 5,000 of you.
Yes.
Literally overnight.
Yeah.
Right? You are now you're in a street. Something you've never had. You didn't grow up in a street. You didn't have a street. Right? You have a street. You have these neighbors on your side, at the back. You have these people in front of you. Right? And I remember imagining how it was from my grandfather and my grandmother the day after they arrived. That, their first morning, when you walk out and you're like, what is this thing? Where it is, the whole thing is totally alien to them. Where you have all these people, you don't know any of these people, because you grew up with those 3 families on the farm for generations. Now you have total strangers all around you. You're living in this land that, even though you were living on a farm, you still lived in a sprawling land. So to say, you did not have necessarily like rights to do whatever, but you didn't have a fence. Right? Now here's a fence here, here's a fence there. And I remember imagining all those people, especially the adults at the time, and say, what do we do now? Okay, I have a gate here. I walk out, like, what are we supposed to do? It's Saturday morning. What is it that I'm going to do? Because on the farm, I would have my own things that I would be doing and whatever. So now it's like, okay, we have to build a community. Actually. We actually have to build from scratch. And you don't even know how to build it, because the architecture is forcing you to build community in a particular way. In that townships are not communal spaces. Right? Now you're like, okay, now we have to create a communal space in the yard. And the whole time I'm thinking, so that could have been a proper and deep culling of spiritual practices, because you're like, where am I going to do this? How do I relate to nature when there's not even a tree here? There's not a plant here. How? And then like, okay, now, like, that very first moment where it's those 4-roomed houses and it's a fence. There's no grass, there's no plant, there's no nothing. And even things like grass, because on farms you don't have a lawn, you have grass. Like, okay, now we have to come up with a garden and develop this whole thing. So in my mind, I'm like, I think that is a big part of how so many spiritual insights and relations with nature fell away because you couldn't transport them into that environment.
And you know what was interesting though is that I feel like then they were like, okay, a plan. Because there's so many stories that you hear about koko nana le garden. And ne gona le morogo, ne gona le pumpkin, and there were beautiful flowers. So it goes back to that one of those three options about being culled or being disengaged from who you are, is that one of it was, okay, adapt or die. So they were like, yo, okay, sharp, are a little garden patch, vegetable garden patch. Let's make this thing look nice. But I can't imagine that it was something that was nice to do, because
It's not gardening.
It's
sustenance. It's for life. It's for living.
Now it's about staying alive, where before it was about being.
Okay. That's an interesting distinction to make.
So now, at least bazamile. Bazamile hore ba ire something. Bazamile hore ba ire something nyana. Wait. Arare, garden patch nyana. Even the community that now we have to rebuild, because yes, they lived on farms. In the example or that you just gave, they lived on farms, but there were a community of farms. Like even in a village, right? But it was a community. Or the courtyard, for festivities, ceremonial things, and there's a whole process of restorative justice that happens with the council of elders and whatever.
The chiefs.
So a whole system born. So now they have to bring that system into the townships.
Like it's a system of governance.
Yes. Or they have to build a system of community in the townships.
Yes.
So I feel like as much as we were uprooted from that and it was alien to us and we felt so uncomfortable in that situation, I feel like they really did try. Even in the community building, back in the day, you hear the youth club that they started, ne go kopaniwa go groundong kai for sports, ne go na le community forum, as we would call it now, so they started building those things that they learned in the farms that they used to live, even though your neighbor is like a kilometer away in that village. Mar ne ba try to build that communal care, that collective economy, or even that self-sustainability. Let's try and make something for ourselves within the little space that we got. So I really do want to acknowledge the fact that they really did try.
But life became about survival.
Over time, then life becomes also, because again now the laws became more and more violent. In which they would separate the familiar living that we would have, where everybody has a spiritual role, an economic role, a cultural role, a familial role, and all of those things. Then what? That's how intensified it got. But let's cut off their roots. Space so that they don't have time to be practicing their things and doing their things. And then also within the space, branch cut off. Then the men in our families go and work, go the mining. And then the females in our families And then already, what are they doing? They're disrupting the spiritual roles back to the custodianship. Because even within a familial space, there's custodianship. And then they introduce child labor and all of those kind of things. So what they did is then they disrupted even within a familial space, outside of now the communal space. Within the familial space, they start to disrupt even just that. Then it becomes about survival thereafter.
And then with the introduction of religion then became, I suppose, the more solid separation of spirituality, or spirituality then becoming an external thing.
Hey,
because it's a thing that you do, it's a thing you do on Sundays.
Hey. And then now you can't practice your spirituality. You can't. How
you have to bury to hide it.
And hide mkomboti in the ground. So now munna wa ka o tsamaile o ile bereka go mining ko kai or o bereka go all these towns. The only way now in this little space that I've got is I remember through ancestral memory or through growing up. Okay, let me do that. For the people that are still left here, or the men that come back home every evening, or whoever, then let me do that as a way to be able to supplement the income ya muhai.
I think what's really interesting about how black women then started making traditional beer and how it became a business was that because originally the brewing of beer was to facilitate also the communal aspect of life, the coming together of communities, the coming together of different structures of society, and as part of expression of whatever ceremonial processes. And now, because now it was about a business, it wasn't necessarily just about communal coming together. It was still just about survival. So even that communal coming together was void of the spiritual aspect of it. Is that a right assertion to make?
I think so. I think it is right, because over time then it wasn't about that. Ke stress, ke tso bereka go mining ya go kai go Randfontein or wherever. I just want to go somewhere where I can just get a 1-2 nyana. Ne? I can't go and have a whiskey because I don't have access to it. I can't go and have marula beer because there's a problem. So at least Mam Tembu o khona gore ra itse gore ke ene the best brewer of Mkomboti. Ke fete ko ene ke ire ke enwe. But Mam Tembu needs it to survive so that she's got a supplementary income. So then it also then shifts what you're saying. It shifts that then being a ceremonial thing and a celebratory thing, because it wasn't only a ceremonies that we would drink marula beer, renwe gemere, or renwe mageu as beer, or renwe beer la Batswana. It was also when we got together as a community to celebrate. So now it was only about you're going through the most goisha. Let me support but baba goisha, but also I'm getting a supplementary income so that I can survive. Because so yes, you're right. I think over time then it became about that. It became about then I'm brewing this so that I can survive.
And I'm drinking this so that I can survive.
So that I can survive. Exactly.
And so communal coming together then also just became about survival.
But you know what is interesting is that when we do come together, then we remember. So I get Mam Tembu. I brewed the best mkomboti that you could ever think of. Mam Tembu has been brewing that for days, and it's like a whole production line. Yes, Mom Tembu's brewing it for survival. Yes, nah. As Babankosi, I'm coming there to drink it because I just want to just forget about my troubles. Maburu antwense di pasa all the way until kifitla ko tanchiping. But when I come together with you, I remember some semblance of how it was. Where borakgolo khoko ba rona ne ba phela go di farming, go di villaging, go di plotong before they were forcefully removed. So it's also almost like it was also, yes, the motivators for survival, but there's something that also helps ignite remembrance of who I was. And then, yes, rekopana ko shebini ya Mam Tembu. But within Khokopana Haruna ko shebini ya Mam Tembu, we've got those moments, that hour, those 2 hours, those 3 hours that I'm there to remember what community means to me.
So now those people went and had kids. And now the kids are, and to an extent their grandkids, are finding that in that process of being brought up by those people who were doing those things to either try to connect or to survive, there's something deeply missing in my life. And from what I can tell, it seems that there's a spiritual gap now. And now we have an entire generation where, for reasons that, you know, are not as clear, are going through some form of a spiritual resurgence, which to an extent seems to be wreaking havoc with these kids, because now these kids are trying to connect. They're feeling that there's something to connect to, but they can't go to their parents and say, because their parents were busy surviving. Now they have nothing to tell them when they say, you know, I need to do ancestral ceremony. And my father says, I was at work, at the mines, at the farms, at the this. I can't help you. I don't know what you're talking about, because my parents were busy surviving. Now I'm getting to the roots of now this issue of spiritual burnout, where I feel like it's not even a situation of spiritual burnout. It's beyond that, because I feel like we're burning out quickly because we don't have a foundation. My question to you is, where do you think we are going wrong in how we are trying to connect with spirituality that is leading us to feel overwhelmed by it?
We have been socialized to get to a result. The result must be as quick as possible, right? And it must make sense. I get it. I'll give you an example. Ke godile ko locationing in the northwest ko Rustenburg, but my upbringing would probably be what we would call a middle class upbringing in the context of a child living in the township. Okay? And then I have the privilege they told me to question, they told me to get results, they give me a drive, you must project manage everything, and so on and so forth. So now, my socialization is that. Ne? I work in now, how? How to gifty, fat. How do I search her? Back to your example. How no okay, but now I need results now because that's how I've been socialized. In fact, not only do I need results, I need to know why. Where does it come from? Who, what, and when? I need to know all of those things because that's how I've been socialized. That's how I grew up. That's the education I got. Around where I live, that's how we look at life. I need to know those things. I don't have anywhere to go. So now I need to understand what does this thing mean if my immediate people that can give me those answers don't even know themselves, but I need them now because I've been socialized. I need to know how bereka. A task and there's an end goal. Yeah, that task. And you start the task, you prioritize items within your task, and then you get to an end goal. Project management 101. Ke project the ashi. So the biggest thing for us or with us is around getting to milestone, and we want to see a result as a consequence of the milestone. We also need to understand why we're doing this project in the first place. On top of understanding why we need to do this project in the first place, we need to understand where it comes from. What originates? What strategic objective? Strategic Exco member haiti sepe. Horwar board member shule. Koma rapping, koma tunyenu kolo wile. Orobet. Exco member haiti sepe. Our parents don't know anything. Marahona strategic objective etagelang somewhere that we need to meet. Renale project. So aritu ruko kai where? We don't know. We know that when is now. So I've got the pressure of understanding what I need to do this when. Now we need to deal with the minefield. Yeah, how? Kiri social media barabota biana. Ke I get what research I know because of how it. I get exco ile na itisepe. Ke wena momo Google busy. Okay. And then after you need to know then okay sharp. You understand okay, where it comes from you're not sure. The how is dodgy. When you are very sure. What Leone is dodgy. So there's so much pressure in all of those that you need to get to an end, but you need to get to an end goal. You know why you need to know that you know that you need to get to an end goal? Because you feel some sort of pressure.
Where is this pressure coming from?
Within ourselves, but it also relates to all these questions that are unanswered. Hey, but that's why it creates a pressure. But you also feel it. No, man, something's not right, man. Something's not right. Something's not right. Are no tella biala yana re re bolelle bagolo motho teng ga itsuira biala okay are passeng o passa a reng na re go gae ba goletse le ko kerekeng ro ira yang rapella morena Jesu.
In your experience as a sangoma specifically, are these some of the issues that you've picked up when people come to you, like the patterns of issues that people have? People simply don't know where to start.
That is the biggest part of why people come. Rotomagai. I've got this burning thing that I feel I need to do, but where do I start? Where do I start? Mama ka gaitsi sepe, kokwa ka gaitsi sepe, ma kreken father ke wole ko mabitleng. Nna ba bang ba le ke ba salwane gato nna ke na le gift ke a lora dilo ke irang ke thoma ke reng nna. So that creates this pressure, like auto thoma o ring, but you feel it within you. Something man is driving me to get to somewhere. But where are you gonna start? So that's where the source of pressure then starts. In general, some people are lucky and privileged to be able to say, oh, I can already locate where this drive comes from. A lot of people have no idea. All we know is that we're driven to do these things, and then some of us, you physically see it happen. Walwala, you have meltdowns, breakdowns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ba re badimo ba go fureletse o ba re badimo ba think or nna ke tse sepe ke tse fela go kwa ka motho a modimo le go kwa ka ke touch and go because I ke tse fela gore o nyetse in this family gore ene o tswa go ka a ke itse ya no nna I've got this feeling, this drive, this thing that is pushing me, that is affecting me even physically for some of us, to try and understand what does it mean. But I don't even know where to start.
Why is it so difficult to find help, considering that there are so many healers today? Never mind that our parents don't know, but it seems like people are even more lost with thousands of healers around.
I actually don't think so. I think people now have the opportunity of access to information, and it's about discernment.
Okay.
If you were to imagine the landscape ya spirituality 15 years ago, there's a plethora of healers, seers. Hey, ke TikTok or ke Facebook, there's a lot of that. The challenge that we're dealing with is discernment, not access.
Not access to
not
information.
access. We're not dealing with issues of access to information.
And how do you determine discernment?
Iwela, back to your first question. Your first question was, how about, according to your understanding or your connection or whatever, but and how did they relate to spirituality? It goes back to how we relate to spirituality. And it also goes back to the examples that you've given in to how we got here. That there's so many things that have been factors in which could block us from connecting to self.
That's the missing part.
That is the missing part. So then we will externalize everything. Information Gogo Thato, Gogo Mamam, Kulu Mamang, Jonjo Mamang, Makosi Mamang. Hey, even in Christianity, the evangelical preachers, the pastors, the men of God, we want something outside of ourselves, where all we need to do is discernment. And then your next question is probably going to be, okay, how do we practice that discernment? We practice so nicely. Oh, we need to have discernment. That's all good and well. How do we do it? It's around how do I connect back to myself in ways that matter to me. How meditate utlwa bang? How rapela utlwa bang? How phahla o ikutlwa bang? Guys. Letswalo is the simplest things.
What is I've heard Letswalo has a way. There's a way in which Letswalo gets confusing in language terms.
So in language,
there's intuition, then there's Letswalo anxiety.
So in this instance, ke bua ka intuition. I get that feeling that you feel, man. I really deeply connect with this person, or I resonate, or we see this place I feel sharp. A gona ngaka e tlo fan letswalo o na le lona o tshotse ka lona e tsamisana le the first rite of passage o thomileng ka yona into this. What is the greatest gift? Yeah, birth. Go refill letswalo. We were given the gift. Even if it's not even a gift, it's feeling that we were birthed into, or birthed with, or brought forth. It's intuition. Your intuition will never go wrong. Never. Your intuition will never betray you. Ever, 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 ever. Tlogela go ilo nyakana le dilo tse dintsi kae. If you've got a lot of information overload, ne? And you don't know how then to discern. In this instance, intuition. Listen to your gut. Listen to intuition. Listen to what resonates. Listen to what you're feeling.
But now the challenge now is that we are what they call an anxiety generation. And people have this issue of struggling with differentiating intuition and anxiety. How is it that, for one, you differentiate between the two, or you'd rather, I think a better word is, how do you discern between the two? And secondly, how do you cultivate the one without feeding the other?
The cultivation is what I was saying earlier on. In their stillness in the morning, and they connect to themselves. It's a form of cultivation. Babang need to do some sort of action, beta yoga or whatever. Some people listen to music. Some people read books, and so on and so forth. So cultivation, I think it was a misanale. Or what is it that you connect to that makes your spirit feel at ease? Because I get your spirit self needs to be relaxed in order for you to then connect and in order for you to cultivate. The issue that I think a lot of people have is what the first question was about, is the differentiation between what we would call anxiety and what we would call intuition. And that also goes then back again to the question you asked about the relationship with spirituality, which actually is, how do you connect to your spirit self? Because relationship with spirituality had to do with my spirit self. And how to answer that. Because all I know about what it is that it's a sense of knowing.
And not a sense of being fearful. Discomfort.
Even the knowing ona leona is a knowing, yes, something isn't good. It's a sense of knowing. So I don't have an answer for how do I differentiate between intuition and anxiety in relation to lefokola letswalo and in relation to just us understanding discernment. All I know is that it's a sense of knowing.
What I was thinking about, a way, or rather how we are engaging with it, intuition and the difference between that and anxiety, is that intuition is a way of interpreting things. It's sort of a mechanism of interpreting emotions in a way, whereas anxiety is an emotion, right? So I think my thinking is that we live in a system that emphasizes us focusing on the things that make us anxious. And then when we become anxious about a lot of things, the anxiety itself starts feeling like intuition because everything feels like a danger. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you have intuition interpret is the tool of interpreting, whether even if, whatever could cause anxiety, or intuition can lead you to something that can cause happiness, or, intuition is not a foreboding feeling about something bad that's about to happen, which I think is sometimes the more typical interpretation of, my intuition told me not to go. My intuition told me not to do this. My intuition kept me safe. There's always a constant interpretation of it being a foreboding thing that something bad is going to happen, where my intuition actually told me to go to this place, and that's where I met my partner. My intuition told me to apply for this job, and then I got it, and I'm in a good place. So I'm trying to make sense of this conundrum between anxiety and between anxiety and intuition, because I feel like the aspect of anxiety is at the core of why we feel spiritually burnt out, because we are finding ourselves now at a point where I am anxious about absolutely everything, and absolutely everything that I've tried with spirituality has not worked. Why? Because everyone seems to be doing better than I am. Everyone. I go online, I go on Instagram, even my friends, they seem to be, they have connected. This person that I follow online said, if you do this, you connect, and then your things will be fine. And there are people who said, yes, I went and I did this, and I've connected, and I have this, I have that. There's all these, there's all this feedback of people who have done certain things, and it has worked out for them. Clearly, I've been doing the wrong thing. But I feel like I'm at a point where I actually don't want to do anything anymore. I'm tired now.
It goes to what you said just before when you were reflecting on intuition versus anxiety. And for me, what has helped me is to move away from spaces that cause me anxiety in order for me to connect to my intuition. Because if you are in a constant state of a space that activates your anxiety, so you used social media as an example. So now what helps me personally is that when I'm a single mother, I've got children, I work 9 to 5, and then I've got this whole thing. So basically, on a practical level, I work 7 days a week, generally. Kuto restaning. Kina anxiety ya gore ba tlo ntimela mabone. Kina anxiety ya gore bana ba tlo ba shapo ko mmereko ko skolong. Ko mmerekong kina le di deadline, kina le di pressure, and then I got pressures of friendships in terms of just how to relate to people, and then I've got pressures of or issues or whatever that are love relationships, all of those kind of things, depending on where they are, could cause anxiety. I get it. So where does my intuition have space to express itself?
And where do you go if your whole life is giving you anxiety?
I kere bialo.
Yes.
So nakere, as a practical example, for me, when now I understand hor nna ha ke ntse mona ke le mo in the space and I am anxious about everything. What works for me is I extract myself. Whether it's a couple of hours, whether it's a weekend, whether it's a retreat, it's a trip, traveling and going outside of the spaces in which then activate the anxiety helps me connect to my intuitive self. Sharp. But we don't have the privilege to travel, or we don't have the privilege to whatever. Okay, what moments are you giving yourself in which you tune out of the feeling of anxiety so that you can then distinguish between So, but because we're tapped into, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier on about how systematically, and what we spoke about, systematically we are put in a space that is going to fester in anxiety, because that's what the system needs. And that's why I was like, whatever you have that helps you connect, whether helping you connect means you sit for a moment and you read a book, whether you paint, whether you work with your hands, whether you speak to someone that you love and you release whatever. Because then for that moment you forget taba tsa lefatshe. O ka se iswe for 2 hours, 3 hours, a weekend when you can just release. So now practically it means when I'm feeling completely overwhelmed by anxiety, I go out of the spaces that cause that. And that also means relationships, friendships, family. If I don't want to go and have a whole family gathering because I know it's going to cause me anxiety, I'm not going to do that. Now what we're talking about is that now it's a form of self-care. But you see what happens? That self-care helps us to connect to our spirit self, which helps us connect to our intuitive self. And it's weird how when we travel, wherever we go, 9 times out of 10, we don't have access in terms of connectivity, in terms of mobile phones. Network. So all the things that connect to me, that causes me anxiety, usually come in the form of this little rectangular device called a cell phone. For me.
Would you recommend a person who, for them, they use social media to get some kind of spiritual insights or information? Would you recommend them to stop doing that as a way of helping them with possible burnout? If it causes
them anxiety, stop it. Social media was not designed, it wasn't designed to relieve us of anxiety or relieve us of confusion. Because it's part of the socialization, the matrix, and all of those kind of things. So, when you go social media, ke Gogo Thato, ke Gogo Mamang, everybody has contradicting opinions, and even just within your own social space. What you were saying about my friend, ending causes a discomfort, which in the end can relate to anxiety. Why am I on this platform? But there are people who, because over a certain time they've gotten to learn, actually I'm just going to connect to what resonates with me. They take what they need or what they resonate with more social media and leave the rest alone. So it's not an easy thing. Okay, how about that information go social media, or how about that information mara information high sharp to social media? It goes back to the issue of discernment. Wabon. And a gona ngaka e tlo go rutang discernment, ngaka or a healer or a seer or a priestess or whatever can help you, give you the tools to be able to connect to your intuitive self so that your discernment can be activated, so that you can then recognize the difference between the two. But in terms of you doing the work for yourself, is you need to understand what are the triggers of that anxiety. And then how do you disengage from those triggers, anxiety at me? So that you can then sit with yourself and listen to what your intuition is telling you. So burnout and all of those things, yes, sometimes it's related to the fact that we absorb things that we shouldn't be absorbing. That creates anxiety because it's externalized to Thato o shapo ke bona ka dilo tsa di shapo ene o irang se ke sa siring, that it seems like ene bophelo ba gagwe bo sharp, the pressures, all of those kind of things. Yes, it could be about that, but burnout sometimes is around, okay, you've got a cup, and then in the cup, here's the cup, and then the cup is me, and then I'm filling it with everything that I don't need. That causes me to burn out. Or the cup is full and I'm trying to fill it with things, but already I get an English phrase barring something about a cup being empty. You can't work from a cup. You can't fill a cup that. There's a phrase, man. I'm trying to remember it. There's a phase around you can't work from a cup
that you have to fill your cup first before you pour into other cups, something like that.
Something along those lines. But sometimes you fill a cup ka eng. What are you filling your cup with? You might fill your cup and you're filling your cup with things that have got nothing to do with you. Ne? You might then have a cup that is half empty and then you fill it with things that exhaust you, but it's still your cup. Ne? Or you might have a cup that you can't fill at all. So, taba ya burnout relates to what am I feeling within myself that I'm letting out of myself that benefits me and my well-being? Or what am I inviting in my life that doesn't benefit me at all? My issue with burnout personally, I feel like I overextend myself. So I give everything of myself to everybody else. Ne? And then I don't have time for myself. I don't have time for self-care. I don't have time for connecting to myself. And then I feel a sense of resentment because if I everything to everyone, but what am I filling my cup with? That relates to my own personal well-being. Whereas some people, they're burnt out because they're chasing things that are outside of themselves. So back to the analogy, ba fill their cup with things that have got nothing to do with them. And then you're going to feel burnt out. And then it goes back to your thing around sometimes you're doing all these things khadi benefit. So I'm spiritualed out. CCMA ya spirituality or ya sedimo. No ka re o ka tsentsa case or batho ba modimo. O itse linkirise di ritual tse dintsi bjang. Ke tswa dingaka tse dintsi bjang. I've been told to do this and I can't do it anymore. That's usually when you're chasing the destination in terms of embracing the journey. So for me, my personal issue with burnout is that it's an overextension of giving everything to everything else but myself. and then I have nothing left for myself.
And what do you do when you find yourself at that point?
And I suppose that then comes to why I thought, okay. Also, the disclaimer is that I find it very hard to ask for help. Mm-hmm. Ne? And there's a thing about spiritually gifted people, healers, and then maybe more people who are then the facilitators of people's healing journeys, like the Gogo and what have you. That there is a strange thing around a sense of obligation. Wait till you feel like if a house are to how you can't say no to helping people because people need help. Wawa? So there's this awkward moment of obligation to help people, even when you feel like today yes, there's all these self-help and beautiful philosophies around. Oh yes, that's the analogy. How are you going to fill another cup when your cup is full of yourself? Oh no, I forgot it again. But how are you going to help someone else if you're already betria how it's a go one by basically? O thusa motho o mong biang wena o lapile. So how are you going to help that other person? I understand all of that. I don't think people understand the pressures of when you're a healer and someone comes out on an emergency. You can't easily say, hey, listen, come tomorrow. Because there's something that is empathetic within you that wants to help that person. Or, doctor. Okay, doctor, o fetsa go tloka auto, ne? O driver o ya gae. Ga driver a ya gae, go na le accident. A gona di ambulance tse di tlang. But nna ke le doctor, I know gore I can help that person to stop bleeding to death. Ki reng ke fete. I just had an 18-hour shift. I last saw my kids go to school 2 days ago because I had to leave early. I haven't spent time with my family, nothing. And also I just want to rest. I am exhausted. I come from a 6-hour surgery and I'm driving home and Mutushule is bleeding to death in an accident. I know, and I've got the tools in my car. I just need to take my medical kit out. I
guess the challenge for you guys as Gobel is that it's not one accident. There's 10 accidents, one after another on the road.
Exactly.
One worse, the next one worse than the one before.
Exactly.
Most of the Gobelas that I know or have spoken to have gone through some kind of breakdown.
Yes.
Not necessarily like emotional or whatever, but most of them have gotten to a point where they just collapsed, for lack of a better word. And these are people of a certain age. And I say this because I know Gobelas who are elderly people who have not gone through or in their understanding of it. It seems as though a lot of people who have become healers, let's say in the past 10 years, or have become Gobelas in the past 5 to 10 years, have gone through some kind of breakdown. Is it the time that we are in? Is it the state of spirit? What is it? What is causing this, and why is it so prevalent within those of that age group in terms of age, meaning the time in which they have been healers and not necessarily the number of years.
Yeah. There are times that we live in. So I want to personalize it because I want to give it from a lived experience. Ke nna ke Thato, ke bereka ko Sandparks. So ke bereka 9 to 5. There are certain people that then, through whatever connection, mainly it's a spiritual connection. So there is maybe even a tangible thing where there's a contract between the ancestors, between me and the Twasa incumbent, Otenang. Ne? That is seemingly outside of me in terms of outside of me as Thato.
Okay.
But it's within me in terms of my calling. I get. Yes, we go through the whole process. No, there is definitely something that I need to facilitate for you in your journey. When you're a Gen Z and you're going through the most in the society that we live in, issues of identity, issues of placement, socio-economic issues, all of those kind of things. Gender issues, all of that. You live in a violent society, you feel unsafe. And you are now being called into this journey. And for whatever reason, I need to facilitate that. Mar nna ke bereka 9 to 5. Ne? And then on top of that, then I do my work mondombenki healer other people. And then you come into my space and I've got kids. So I need to find a way to live with you. And also understanding the triggers, the trauma, the baggage, the good, the bad, and the ugly that you're coming with. And I need to hold space for you. But I've got this whole life. Maybe I've got financial issues. Half the time I can barely just live. Wabon? But yet, I know that I've got a calling in order to facilitate your journey of becoming. And maybe I don't have problems. Maybe my problems are I've got emotional trauma myself. I've got shadow work that I need to do myself. And yet you're coming in. There's an expectation that Tonte ilehore facilitated this journey of your growth and your healing. Ne? With everything that you're coming with. Everything. And you're a complete stranger. Ne? And you're coming into my life and also into my space. And you're going to be in my space for a particular time. Every single day, I need to be present for you. I need to make sure that I connect to everything that you need spiritually to grow and heal. Whilst I'm trying to navigate the human aspect of myself. Relationships, parenthood, friendships, all of those kind of things. Corporate world. The very same socio-economic issues that you've got, I've got them too. Then I must navigate between your family dynamics as well as you as a human person. Ne? On top of that, I need to hold space for your spiritual issues that you're coming with, or even just your spiritual essence. I need to hold space for that. I need to do that daily, and I need to be present to do that daily. That means for the moments that I am in your space, or you are in my space, or we're connected, I need to be present for you. Ke tswa mo trafficking, ke tswa ko Sandparks, traffic ya 1 hour. Ngwana o na le some rehearsal ya ballet ko kai. I'm stressed. Now it's 2 hours in traffic. I must come here and I must sit with you. Get 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock and do the closing work. If it's like 12 o'clock, tshwantse ke robale. 3 o'clock tshwantse ke tsoge to be present for your closing work. 5 o'clock, I must be also awake so that I can take my children to school. And then I've got 8 hours of dealing with corporate bullies, with systematic racism, with not being fully compensated for my work, and all of that kind of thing. And then I've got a fight with my lover, whatever, and then I come back again. And then it's a repetitive cycle. Right? And then over the weekends, or during the week, if I'm not working, then when you come into this ndumba, I must forget everything else outside of myself and focus on you. Energetically, that is intense already. Or I do treatments and I must be fully present. I must, your expectation is that there's a reliance on me as the so-called facilitator, the healer.
And I'm paying you.
And some people come with that attitude, vele. But I'm paying you. Leo ni mathwasana. Gore ke go patela mos. Gore o nthuse ka ntwe so. Gore o facilitate my journey. So when you have tantrums, I must be okay with that, or I must navigate myself through that. Energetically, it's a thing. Emotionally, it's a toll. Mentally, it's a struggle. Because I get now being called toll space for you. So imagine that happens daily, for months, for years, and whatever. There's no ways that at some point you can be like, I am exhausted. Because
this is 7 days a week.
7 days a week.
For months on end.
In this example, 7 days a week. Or 3 hours in a day. Le 3 hours or balang, ki toro, ki unpacking of the toro. Get trips to where because we're not to heal one put our badimba hobare rie ko Mozambique or neko Zimbabwe rolata ing I must make that happen. I get ke gobela gago. Wabon? I must do that for you. I must deal with your mother that doesn't want you because and I must navigate that relationship between your mother and you and your mother and me. To a point where then we have an understanding. Then there's logistical issues. Okay, fine. Moto ona. Uisiwa ko kai. Some people don't understand the lineage. You must connect to that and somehow find guidance, which means you have to channel and connect. Bungaka is spiritually exhausting because when you are truthful and you're authentic to it, you have to connect. But there's something that people forget is the actual labor. The physical labor that you have to put aside to doing. The hikes up and down the mountains. Yes, you as a Twasa, you're coming with me. I have to facilitate all of that. I have to wake up and drum for you at 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever time.
Then in this particular case, it doesn't sound like there's a solution. Because, well, there are people who, I suppose, for whatever reason, they would then quit work and become a full-time kobela. Does that work better?
So, now, I get a Nikofa example as me.
Yes.
Currently,
yes.
As the fact that I now work 9 to 5. I've got a lot of friends who don't work 9 to 5. But they've also got other responsibilities. Right? You might think it works better. when you don't have the pressures of having to go o tsoga frugo o ile bereka 9 to 5 go kae go makgoeng wena mmereko wa gago ke mondombeng yes at face value we might think it's easier ne but that means you dedicate a lot of your time then in the presence of the work. So then you see more people because just logistically time-wise, you've got time. Whereas I will compact all my divinations and my treatments over a weekend, you've got time to spread it out. So what are sharp when? But what I find that has been fascinating for me is that those that then don't work 9 to 5 have other responsibilities that then come up. I get you've got space.
So you take more matwasa.
You could possibly take more matwasa, possibly. Or then you could be the one who's then called upon with the meetings at the community as the leader in that community from a cultural or spiritual perspective to give insights. You could be the one that leads familial issues, all of those kind of things. All I'm saying is that whether you work 9 to 5 or how work 9 to 5, there is a thing around how do we balance us being human and us being then spiritual beings and being healers. And that is difficult. And I don't think people appreciate how challenging it could be to navigate that in the modern space that we live in now. In these times, we must be present for all of our roles, whether we are or how we. So I don't know how one could not think that there's a possibility that you could not be burnt out and tired and exhausted. Sometimes now on a Sunday, all I want to do is wake up at 9 o'clock, read a book.
Or watch trash TV.
And then in the afternoon, get a trash TV. Gin and tonic ke mo thoko ga ka. The entire weekend. I want to go to watch a live show more often than I don't now. I want to go to theater
without anyone coming to you.
Ha ke le go theater ke bona dilo motho shu o tshwenya ke rakholo khoko wa gagwe a shule wa go Zambia since a tlogetse nkgo ya gagwe ya go nisha pula ya nna tshwntse eno ke affectiwe ke motho shu nna ne ke re go lebella theater production go state theater batho mamodimo. So then the question is, I get it, and the whole thing is, okay, who heals the healer? How do we create communities in which we hold space for each other? The accidents one after the other. Who's there to hold space for you? And that goes back to, then the question is how we related with spirituality. We related to it, yes, within the self, but earlier on our saying is that it's a communal thing. And then when we spoke about the gifts, it's around everybody has different gifts. So that means everybody within the community has a contribution to make. So how do we harness meaningfully a community that can hold space for the people that you've just described earlier on, where you're saying, I am exhausted of doing the spiritual things because finally so many aspects to it. And I've tried everything, but which is lovely for you, Gogo Thato, to talk about, intuition, discernment, you can go wherever and connect to your intuition. But my reality is that I am tired. So it goes back to the philosophy of communal care then. And I get it earlier on, I was saying, na ke na le problem ya go khopela thuso. So what I needed to learn is the ability to ask for help. Or I'm drowning, I can't do it. But on top of that, the reason why we created things like Heal the Healer is for us to say, people who are spiritually gifted, spiritually curious, healers, and everybody within that broad spectrum, how do we hold space for each other and heal each other?
So in Heal the Healer, is it what is it exactly?
So Heal the Healer I asked the question, we always ask who heals the healer. So how about we do something about it? Whether we get together once every quarter and we have a healing circle where we discuss issues that affect us, or whether we travel somewhere. So Heal the Healer is a community that we have created of all those people that are struggling, or not even struggling, that within African spirituality we don't have organization as dingag, but we don't have a platform for communal care.
We don't have church.
We don't have church. And also then the church is not the mpande. What about the church being a group of people that come together and say, how do I hold space for you? So it's a collective of individuals that somehow spirit have brought together, that come together and hold space for each other. What that means practically is that we have healing circles in which we tackle a variety of topics or issues. But also we have retreats in which we get away. So it's that extraction that I was talking about. We extract ourselves from the things that cause us an anxiety. All of those things that affect us from a human level. And we say, how do we connect on a spiritual level as rona re le batho? Ne? So it is something that also I'm hoping that ignites or activates or encourages how do we in various communities hold space for each other as batho ba ba struggling le what spirituality means in this modern era based on also what you were saying earlier on about the challenges that we have. So that's what it is. It's a collective of human beings that decided, let's try and see. Babangi initiated healers, some are not initiated healers, some are spiritually curious people. All of these people, some are on a journey of becoming. Some have callings, some do not, some are artists. That's how they heal, when we went through the different categories of healers. All of those people, how do we create a community of care and also restoration for ourselves? But it's mainly to sort of inspire other people to have their own Heal the Healers wherever. Because we need it. So we practically have a healing circle, where we literally heal each other. So also it's a form of like creating collective economy within our space as a community. So let's say your gift is to be able to make something for the Ndumba where I can put candles. And then I am a Reiki master or an energy healer. Then I say, create something for me, by massaging you or by doing energy work on you. Or let me divine you. Where we can look at blind spots and, So we literally heal each other. Because otherwise, because the way that the Western world has been set up, the system has been set up, there's a a lot of supportive structures for wellness practitioners like dingaka, as in doctors, nurses, teachers, and whatever, outside of the organizations. Ne? Just structures. When you're at work, you have a wellness department that looks after the well-being of the employees. But who looks after the actual well-being of us who are trying to navigate our journey within the spirituality in this modern terms with the history that we've got? So that means Rona, it's up to us to make a difference around how do we hold space for each other? How do we create that community? So that's basically what it is.
Thank you. At a very basic level, the spiritual burnout that so many of us are going through actually has nothing to do with whether or not we're doing the spirituality thing right. Put simply, we've been raised in a system that was designed to make us sick. The burnout that you feel is not something that we arrived at solely because of bad spiritual decisions. It is not because you pray at the wrong time, or you used the wrong color candle, or that you used impepo when your ancestors actually didn't use impepo, they used other things. A big part of the reason that you feel burnout is the same reason why most of your problems in your life revolve around socioeconomics. Gogo Thato said that in the most ancient understanding of existence, spirituality was, at a fundamental level, a relationship with self. Now, the system that we live in is structured in a way that it keeps you as far away from yourself as possible for as long as possible. As a result, many of us have a toxic relationship with ourselves. From the moment you open your eyes in the morning to the moment you close your eyes at night, you are totally disconnected from yourself. And at worst, you are at war with yourself. The only thing that fuels us today is the desire to be like other people. It is considered a great achievement today to be absolutely anything but who you really are. Have you ever thought about why is it that Instagram only has a handful of filters? It's because billions of people in the world are trying to look like a handful of people. We are burnt out because we don't know how to feed our spirit outside of what looks like a cool caption or something scenic that we can put on the gram. The spiritual dysfunction that comes from our disconnection with ourselves echoes something that Gogo Jepu said way back in episode 23 when she said that as an individual, you are the first umsamo. You as a person, you as a being are the first altar. You are the first point of contact with anything to do with your spiritual self. It's not candles, it's not ancestral cloth, it's not 3 a.m. prayers. You are God's first contact when it comes to your spiritual life. It is very possible that many of us have no clue what a true connection with self actually looks like. We've spent most of our lives totally immersed in the externalities of modern life, and this is why you can be on 5 different social media platforms where you can connect literally with tens of thousands of people but still feel acutely and devastatingly lonely. Maybe it is time that you took a break from spirituality. Maybe, as Gogo Thato said, you should stop trying to get to a particular spiritual destination. I believe that most of us don't know what we really want spiritually, but we hope that we will know when we get it. And more often than not, we strongly believe that spiritual health comes with some level of material wealth. As a result, We get burnt out because we wake up every single day and run at full speed in a race that we don't even know if it has a finish line, while we're trying to adorn ourselves with material measures of success. This thing is tiring, fam. This thing is exhausting. It's tiring. Maybe it is time to stop running. I don't know what a spiritual break looks like for different people, or how it should be, or even how long it must take. The last time I took a spiritual break, it lasted years, but I do believe that it involves some form of withdrawal, even if it is more an internal withdrawal, in the case where you can't physically get out of your particular space. I am suggesting this with an extreme amount of caution because I don't want to put anyone in a situation where they jeopardize their mental health or their relationships with those around them. At the very least, a spiritual break will involve taking more of an observer approach to your spiritual life. By that I mean simply stepping away and just looking at how you engage with your beliefs. You can still be part of that life, but you spend more time observing yourself and those around you. And it is important not to cast judgment during these observations. Like, have you ever had a moment when you were sitting with a group of people or friends and you just looked at them? What they say and how they say it, how the light hits their skin and how they were when they were just quiet. This is my personal approach to healing from spiritual burnout. I spend a lot of time just observing how I engage with spirituality, how I engage with my understanding of what is spiritual and what is not spiritual. I spend a lot of time evaluating why I look at things in a particular way, or why I look at certain things and try to find certain meanings out of them. For me, a spiritual break is about stepping away from the feeling and thinking processes of constantly wanting to see results, which is extremely difficult in our current understanding of spirituality, which is wholly transactional, because our understanding is that if I do things right, I need to get something out of it, like an ATM. The kind of break that I suggest can happen for months, or it can last all of 10 minutes. For just 10 minutes, you can step away from yourself. In a part of the conversation that didn't make it onto the recording, Gogo Thato said that for those who have been devoted to the path of African spirituality, you can simply fold your cloths and put them away, and take your many colored candles and tell your peoples that just for now, I'm taking a break. I know that some people will say that doing this is a sure way of pissing off your peoples. Or some will say that it is wishful thinking and naive to think that one could simply put away their cloths with no consequences, or that their people would never let them do that. And perhaps it is true for a lot of people. But a devoted spiritual child who is exhausted and fatigued and borderline depressed from all the incessant and desperate attempt to live a good spiritual life is already suffering the consequences. Maybe your break is not for years. Maybe it's just a few days, or just a few hours even. But it shouldn't be idle time. Ideally, it should be spent reflecting and reconnecting with yourself. To look at yourself away from your spiritual paraphernalia. Who are you outside of your spiritual duties? Study yourself like a scientist who is not looking for what is wrong or right, but simply what is. You have to understand that you are the destination. You are the one that you've been running from, and you are the one that you've been running to. This conversation with Gogo Thato is going to stay with me for a very long time, and it's something that I'm going to keep coming back to for years. Part of the reasons why these episodes are so far apart is that I genuinely take time to process what it is that I am learning. As much as this is a podcast, this is also really my personal spiritual journey. I can't treat spiritual lessons as social media content, and I hope that you also don't treat your spiritual journey as a process of collecting catchphrases and captions. Don't move from one thing to another without taking time to digest and, at best, to implement. It will desensitize you over time. You will lose the sacredness of why you are doing this in the first place. And ultimately, this is about your entire life, and not just in this plane of existence either. What you are learning about yourself spiritually right now will echo throughout all your lifetimes and throughout all of eternity.